Hey, welcome back. You know, sometimes the most powerful empires aren't built with bricks and mortar, or even with armies and gold. Sometimes, they're built with paper and ink. With a carefully drawn line, a chosen name for a mountain range, a deliberate blank space labeled Unexplored. An empire can be mapped into existence long before a single soldier sets foot there. That's the story I want to tell you today. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi, and this is Empire Builders, the rise and fall of civilizations. In this episode, we're leaving the ancient world behind for a moment and venturing into the 19th century, to the high, windswept deserts and passes of Central Asia. We're talking about the Great Game, that shadowy, decades-long rivalry between the British and Russian empires. But we're not focusing on the spies or the cavalry charges. We're going deeper, to the very foundation of that conflict. We're looking at the Cartographic War, the battle over the map itself. Picture this. It's the early 1800s. In London and St. Petersburg, generals and foreign ministers are staring at maps of a region between their two expanding empires. It's a vast, nebulous space, a confusing patchwork of emirates, khanates, and tribal lands. On British maps, it's often called India's northwest frontier, or simply Turkestan. On Russian maps, it's the direction of their civilizing mission southward. But the truth is, nobody in those European capitals really knows what's there. The maps are fantasies, filled with guesswork, ancient rumors, and outright lies. Mountains were drawn from travelers' tales, rivers flowed the wrong way, and entire kingdoms were misplaced. This was the problem. You cannot control what you do not know. You cannot defend a border that is just an idea. So, the first move in the Great Game wasn't a diplomatic insult or a troop movement. It was the dispatch of the mapmaker. These were extraordinary men, not soldiers, primarily, but surveyors, geologists, botanists, and often secret agents. The British called theirs pundits. Disguised as Buddhist pilgrims or traders, they would walk the forbidden routes into Tibet, Afghanistan, and the Pamirs. Their prayer wheels held hidden compasses. Their rosary beads were used to count paces, measuring distances with astonishing accuracy. They would take secret readings, hiding their notes in false-bottomed chests, all to add one more accurate line to the map in Calcutta. On the Russian side, officers like Nikolai Przhevalsky would lead expeditions, mapping, collecting specimens, and, crucially, making alliances with local rulers. Every time a Russian cartographer fixed the position of a city like Khiva or Bokhara, that city became a little less mysterious, a little more a potential piece on the imperial chessboard. And that's the crucial shift. As these blank spaces filled in, the region stopped being a geographical place and started becoming a strategic space. It was no longer just the home of the Kazakhs or the Pashtun. It became a buffer zone, a glacis, a sphere of influence. The maps created a new reality. When British cartographers, for instance, decisively drew the northern border of India along a line from the Indus to the Himalayas, the so-called Durand Line, they weren't describing a pre-existing truth. They were imposing one. They were carving up ethnic lands with a ruler and a pen, creating a political fact that would cause conflict for centuries to come. The map was no longer a reflection of reality. It was an instruction manual for a future empire. This all came to a head in one of the most dramatic and tragic mapping expeditions of all time. In the 1840s, two young British officers, Arthur Connolly and Charles Stoddard, were sent separately into the emirate of Bokhara, in what is now Uzbekistan, to feel out the Emir and counter-perceived Russian influence. They were captured by the notoriously cruel Emir Nasrallah. For years, they rotted in a vermin-infested pit, a Sayachal, or black well. Their plight became a cause célèbre in London. Another officer, a brilliant but reckless mapmaker and linguist named Captain Joseph Wolfe, volunteered to go and negotiate their release. Wolfe made it to Bokhara, but he was too late. By the time he arrived, Connolly and Stoddard had been dragged into the city square and publicly executed. Wolfe barely escaped with his own life. He returned to Britain with no diplomatic victory, but with something perhaps more valuable to the empire: precise, first-hand knowledge. His accounts, his maps, his understanding of the corridors of power in Central Asia filled in another dark corner of the British map. Even tragedy was just more data. The death of two men became a footnote in a growing imperial dossier. So, what was the result of this cartographic war? By the late 19th century, the fuzzy, mythical Central Asia of the old maps was gone. In its place was a precise, measured, and divided region. The new maps showed clear borders between Russian Turkestan and British India, between Afghanistan and Persia. These lines looked solid and authoritative on paper, in the atlases of London and St. Petersburg. But on the ground, they were often invisible, arbitrary, and violently contested. The empire that had been so neatly mapped into existence was, in reality, a fragile, tense, and deeply unstable construction. The Great Game's legacy wasn't just political influence. It was a set of borders that ignored human geography, sowing seeds of discord we still see today. It makes me think, as an engineer and someone who builds things in the modern world, about how we still do this. We don't use sextants and pace-counting rosaries anymore. We use satellites, algorithms, and data analytics. But we still map abstract ideas onto the world and then mistake the map for the territory. We map markets and demographics. We draw lines of digital influence and economic zones. We create clean, logical models of incredibly complex human systems. And there's a danger in that. A danger in believing our own cartography so completely that we forget the messy, unpredictable, and sovereign reality on the other side of the screen or the page. The cartographers of the Great Game, for all their bravery and skill, were building an illusion of control. They gave their empires the confidence to project power into spaces they finally believed they understood. But a map is not a landscape. A borderline is not a fence. And an empire drawn in ink can disappear just as quickly as it was conjured, leaving behind only the scars of its imagined geography. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey into the power of maps and empire, please do share this episode with someone who loves history. For the full archive of empire builders, visit our production home at Light Not Studios. https://www.lightnotstudios.com. I'm Ibnul J. Farabi. Until next time, remember, look closely at the maps you're given. Ask who drew them and why.